Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. How should we assess the developing situation in Afghanistan and what are its implications for India? Now, those sound like simple questions, but they are probably the most difficult to answer at the moment. And those are the precise questions I shall put today to India's former Foreign Secretary and one of the sharpest and most highly regarded minds on foreign policy, Shyam Saran. Shyam Saran, let's start with how you assess the developing situation in Afghanistan, and after that I'll talk to you about what India should do. There is a view that what we've seen is a Pakistani invasion of Afghanistan fronted by the Taliban. Would you agree with that view, or do you think it's a bit exaggerated and unwarranted?
I would put it in another way. I would say it is a Taliban invasion sponsored, abetted and aided by Pakistan and enabled by some terrible incompetence on the part of the United States.
But would you also accept that without the logistical support of the Pakistanis, the ISI and their army, the Taliban could not have done this with the speed with which they have?
I agree completely with that, because I think the Taliban is really a wholly owned subsidiary of Pakistan.
So the hand of Pakistan is the critical hand.
Yes, and you can see the glee amongst the Pakistanis over the victory of their, surrogate in a sense.
Let's then start by focusing on the Taliban. It's almost a week since they entered Kabul. What do you make of what you've seen and heard? Is this a new Taliban, or is it an old Taliban cleverly masquerading behind a new rhetoric and possibly a new manner and style?
Well, it is Taliban 1.0 pretending to be Taliban 2.0. That's how I see it. And if you look at what has been happening over the last 6 days or so, you see that that mask of 2.0 is beginning to fray. And there are many reports coming now, particularly from the outlying areas, from the provinces, but even within Kabul itself, that we are seeing the return of the methods of the barbarity with which Taliban 1.0 was associated.
Let me put some of those contradictions between what Zabiullah Masood, their spokesman, has said and what's happening on the ground, and ask you what you think of those contradictions. To begin with, at his press conference, Zabiullah Masood said that they wanted a government that incorporated all sections of society. There would be no revenge, there would be no searching house to house. But the United Nations claims that in fact the Taliban have been going knocking on people's doors to find out who's worked with the Americans and who worked with NATO. Deutsche Welle says a family member of one of their staff was brutally killed. Amnesty says that in July, 9 Hazaras in the Ghani area were brutally killed or tortured. Who or what should we believe and trust?
Well, I think we should trust what the evidence on the ground is. So all that we just spoke about, in fact, shows that this whole trying to put across a perception that this is a changed lot. They may be more savvy, but I don't think that there is any doubt that the methods of the past are very much in evidence today. So let us believe the what the evidence on the ground is, rather than be taken in by what their spokesmen are saying.
In this instance, there's no doubt that the evidence on the ground is incriminating. It suggests that the Taliban is not living up to what it promises to do. Let me give you another instance. We've all seen on Tolo television a woman anchor interviewing a Taliban commander. Zabiullah Masood said that in fact there would be no discrimination against women. They would be free to study, free to work within the framework of Islam. Sky News, on the other hand, in Britain has reported that outside Kabul, but it didn't say where, women were shot because they weren't wearing a burqa.
Yes.
There are reports that in Herat, girls have been not allowed to go to school. Now, in this instance, is this deliberate hypocrisy and deception to fool the world, or is it a case of different factions of the Taliban being confused and not thinking together?
Well, it may be a bit of both, but I would say that as far as the Taliban leadership is concerned, they certainly wish to be able to present to the world that they are in fact a different lot, ruling Afghanistan today. But when they say that whatever they do will be within the ambit of the Sharia. And they do not define what that Sharia would be, because if there is a different interpretation of Sharia that they are now trying to suggest they are advocating, they are not certainly giving any sign of that. So when you are saying according to Sharia and not specifying that what version of Sharia they are now advocating is different from what they had before, how can we take them at their word? By the way, let us also be very clear, when they were asked about whether or not their ideology has changed, the same spokesman very clearly said that no, as far as their ideology is concerned, as far as their commitment to the Sharia is concerned, nothing has changed.
The whole thing hinges upon, are they now interpreting Sharia differently to what they did in the 90s when they were last in power?
And they are not interpreting it differently if you see what is happening on the ground.
But here what you see on the ground in terms of women anchors on television, and it's not just Tolo
Only
TV.
one anchor.
Well, no, actually the
Well,
BBC has shown...
This is the Tolo.
But since then, the BBC have shown 3-4 different women on different channels anchoring.
Well,
but there is one woman who says she wasn't allowed to.
There are at certainly the official channels, they have all been removed.
So once again, the ambiguity that stems from not being clear what they mean by Sharia is also beginning to affect what we see on the screen.
I think what we need to understand is that the Taliban, as well as their sponsors, particularly Pakistan, I would imagine in addition China, would like them, at least in this initial phase, to try and project a more moderate image, so that the challenge of international legitimacy, that particular challenge is overcome.
And yet on the BBC you have Sekundar Kamani talking about drivers who say they've carried Taliban passengers with their guns, but they kept the music on and the Taliban was enjoying it. So, I mean, you have instances that contradict as well.
Certainly, and I think one should also recognize that many of the young fighters today are a different generation. Isn't it?
I come to young fighters.
You have some of the older leaders who are still very much in charge, but you have the rank and file, which is actually a very different generation.
I'll come to young fighters in a moment's time. Let me first put another contradiction to you. Once again, Zabiullah Masood at that press conference very categorically said Afghanistan would not be allowed to become a threat to any other country. But Bruce Riedel, writing in the Economic Times just 2 days ago, says over 1,000 LET and Jaish fighters are on location with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And clearly they're not there as bystanders or cheerleaders. They are clearly supporting the Taliban, and in return, one presumes, they will be given some measure of sanctuary and support. So again, what do we judge about this claim that Afghanistan won't be used for terror against other countries?
Well, the United States itself, which has predicated its departure on the Taliban assurance that it will have nothing to do with the Al-Qaeda and that will not allow Afghanistan, precisely as you said, to become a staging post for terrorists, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS. The Inspector General of the Department of Defense in the United States, in March, in fact, when he was asked in a congressional hearing, he said very, very clearly that our evidence shows that the Taliban have maintained their links with Al-Qaeda and related organizations, and it is unlikely that they would give up these links.
And the UN in June has underlined Al-Qaeda links with
the so
Taliban.
The monitoring committee, the sanctions monitoring committee has said exactly the same thing, that those linkages exist. By the way, what Bruce Riddle has said 1,000, actually from other quarters we hear a figure of 10,000. And don't forget, a very large number of prisoners in the jails in Afghanistan who were associated with many of these,
and they've all been released.
Have all been released.
So on this particular point, that we won't let Afghanistan become a sanctuary and a threat to other countries, all the evidence is that in fact this is a lie.
Yes. So either the best you can say is that they may not be complicit, and that it may be because of the situation within the country and they are not able to establish full control.
That's being kind to them.
That's being kind to them. But my sense is that they are in fact complicit.
Let's at this point come to the point.
By the way, for India, what is very important also is that Lashkar-e-Toiba fighters, Jaish-e-Mohammed fighters, these are all associated, they have fighters fighting alongside the Taliban. What should worry the Pakistanis that they are also the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan also fighting alongside. And I think again for India, what is perhaps something that we must watch very carefully is what is the role that the Haqqani group will play
Absolutely.
in any.
I'll come to that in a moment's time, but let me first pick up the point you were making about the younger Taliban.
Yes.
Taliban that have been born and recruited in the last 20 years since they were last in power.
Right.
Were you about to suggest that maybe they are different, more modern, perhaps in some ways more willing to adapt and change? Was that the point you were making?
Well, I mean, it can be both, isn't it? I mean, they can be more modern in the sense of being able to enjoy, pop music, but they can also be somewhat more radical than perhaps the older generation, who may feel that since they are the victors, why should they in fact listen to the moderating voices, if there are those moderating voices, trying to tell them to restrain themselves?
In fact, this is the precise point made by Ahmed Rashid, who's widely acknowledged as one of the world's authorities on the Taliban, in a recent article in the British magazine The Spectator. Speaking of the new young membership, he says, the new younger members are much more militant and radical. Many have been jailed for extremism. Quite a few have been in Guantanamo and were heavily influenced by Al-Qaeda and its brand of international jihad. And then he adds, these young guns will now be saying, why stop at Kabul? We have just defeated the world's greatest military power. We should take our jihad to our neighbors and convert them to our cause. In other words, these young people are actually much worse than their elders and a much bigger threat. And because they believe they've defeated America, they're cock-a-hoop because they think they can now carry on and defeat the rest of the region.
I think that's a very real danger, and I think what Ahmed Rashid has said is something that we should certainly take very seriously. But I would also add that this whole aspect of having defeated another superpower, we have dispatched one and now the other one. This is not only enthusing and adding huge energy to these young militants, but it is also giving a tremendous boost, a psychological boost to jihadi groups across the world. So, if the expectation was that by this peace deal with the Taliban, somehow or the other you have managed to contain this,
the opposite has happened.
The exact opposite is likely to happen, and that has major implications.
And this will embolden the LAT and the Jaish, the two jihadi groups who are the greatest threat to India.
I have no doubt about that.
Against this background, let's now come to HameedKarzai and AbdullahAbdullah, two people that India has regarded for over a decade or two as very close friends of India. But in the last few days, both of them have been meeting Anas Haqqani of the India-hating Haqqani group, and a group that in fact was called by Mike Mullen when he was chairman of the American Joint Chiefs of Staff as a veritable arm of Pakistan's ISI. These two gentlemen, AbdullahAbdullah and Karzai, have also met the Pakistani ambassador, and there are reports on the Western media as well as in the Indian that whenever a new setup emerges in Kabul, they could be part of it, they could be behind it, they could be involved in creating it. Do you see this as a shift away from being friends of India, or are they in some way, perhaps it's imperceptible, helping India get a foot through the door?
Well, that remains to be seen, because one of the interesting things is that despite the fact that the Taliban is fully on control according to reports that we are getting, and they have reached out to these people or leaders from previous dispensations, we still don't have a government. So, I think one has to ask that question, that if they are fully in control and they are in a position to dictate terms to, say, Karzai or to AbdullahAbdullah, what options do they have? They have none. They are really, in that sense, they are really at the mercy of the Taliban and their Pakistani sponsors. So even the attempt to try and cobble together what would look to the rest of the world as an inclusive kind of government, because this is what the Chinese have been saying, this is what Pakistan has been saying. So I think there is an effort to try and see whether, at least for the purposes of international legitimacy, they can in fact cobble together something that looks like an inclusive government. They have not succeeded so far.
Let me put a theory to you. One thing seems pretty clear, that they are in control of Kabul, except for the airport. Even passage from the city center to the airport is determined by the Taliban.
Yes.
When Americans had to remove people at the Baron Hotel who weren't able to access the airport, they actually had to do it by Chinook helicopter, which means that the Taliban control Kabul. In which case, if they've failed to create a government even after a week, could it be because they're trying to find a way of involving Karzai and Abdullah and people like that, and these people are setting terms that the Taliban can't immediately accept, and so there's a process that requires compromise and understanding. Could that be a possible explanation?
Well, that could be a possible explanation. It could also be that there are, in fact, tensions within the Taliban leadership itself. I mean, it's not a monolithic leadership.
And Baradar hasn't come to Kabul, he remains in Kandahar.
And he was in Pakistani jail for quite some time.
And Akhundzada, according to one report, is in Pakistani detention.
Well, that's a report that we have heard. So there is obviously some jockeying going on within the Taliban, among the Taliban factions. And I would imagine also their external sponsors.
So the situation at the moment is uncertain.
Yes.
But the facts on the ground do suggest that the rhetoric is not being lived up to. The evidence suggests old
Quite
Taliban
right.
is asserting itself.
Quite right. And if anybody had any doubt, frankly, that this is in fact Taliban 1.0, to whom does it matter most? It matters to the people of Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
And if you saw those images on the television of hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Afghans, ordinary Afghans, running after this transport plane taking people out of Kabul, I think the evidence is quite clear.
Quite right. The people at the
to
airport,
people who matter. I mean, it may be affecting us,
Don't
it may
believe
be
this is
affecting
different.
others. As far as the people of Afghanistan are concerned, who should be most, perhaps knowledgeable about what this means for them, they are certainly not buying the argument that this is a different Taliban.
And meanwhile, there's uncertainty and confusion and doubt about creating a government. A week has gone by, there is no government, and we don't know why.
And also, there is evidence of some pushback. Say Jalalabad, you have seen those demonstrations on Independence Day of Afghanistan. You have, even within Kabul, you have seen some demonstrations. We are not getting reports from other places, or you have also the Panjshir Valley, which is not under their control. Now, that may not mean very much, but in terms of optics, it does appear that the initial assessment that this was a country totally under the grip of the Taliban
May not be true.
May not be.
There are signs, we
Yes.
don't want to exaggerate them,
Yes.
of pushback.
Yes.
There are signs of confusion and
Right.
doubt within Taliban ranks.
Yes.
There is no government even after a week.
Yes.
And clearly the rhetoric is being belied by the facts from the ground.
Yes. And as the situation for them becomes less, I would say, amenable to their control, even this mask of, trying to be a kind of a moderate,
That will drop.
inclusive government, that is already beginning to drop and may drop even more as the days go by.
Let's then, at this point, come to what India should do and what India has done. There is a view that in fact India made a mistake by pulling out its ambassador, pulling out its diplomats, and effectively shutting down its mission. That view was first expressed by one of your predecessors, Krishnan Srinivasan. Since then, two other former diplomats have said the same thing, Bhadra Kumar and Fabian. On top of that, there are reports that Sher Mohammad Stanikzai sent messages to the Indians, do not take your diplomats out, we will secure you. And certainly up till now, that Saturday midday, the Brits and the French are still in Afghanistan. And there are mixed reports about the Germans. Some reports say the ambassador is there, others say that a lot are vacated, but at least the Brits and French are there. So my question is simple. Did we make a mistake withdrawing our ambassador, or did we have no choice?
On this point, I do not agree with Krish Srinivasan and some of my other colleagues. Don't forget the history of our presence in Afghanistan. We have had two major attacks against the Indian embassy. One of our colleagues was lost in one of those attacks. There have been major...
Two, in fact. There was an army colleague
2008 and 2009. And attacks against our consulate in Jalalabad, in Herat. So, given that history, how could we take a chance? If tomorrow, for example, with the kind of changing and worsening security situation in Kabul, if there was an attack against the Indian embassy premises and some lives were lost, the same people would be criticizing the government for not having read the writing on the wall and taken our people out to safety.
So staying on was the risk we simply couldn't have taken.
I do not believe that it was prudent on our part to in fact let our diplomats or even our citizens stay there. Don't forget, just a few days before, one of our journalists was not only killed, but his apparently his body was even mutilated.
Although the Taliban, just for the record, I should say, denied they did that.
Well, that's.
But there is an interesting situation that emerges. There could be, and different accounts put a different figure on it, somewhere between 500 and 1,500 Indian citizens in Afghanistan, and now they are without an ambassador, without diplomats, without a functioning embassy. Is there not an argument to make that an ambassador in this environment is a bit like the captain on the deck of a sinking ship? He should wait right till the end, and his responsibility is to ensure that every Indian citizen gets out first. In this instance, the diplomats and the ambassador who should be looking after Indian citizens got out first, but 500 or 1,000 Indian citizens are stuck there.
Well, it is a judgment call, and if you ask me on balance, I think it was prudent on our part, while it was still possible, to get our people out, including our diplomatic personnel. I don't think we could have taken that risk. And yes, of course, we should try and get our citizens out to safety as soon as we can, and several have in fact been evacuated. But I do not buy the argument that, come hell or high water, our people should have been there. And by the way, as far as the British and the French that you mentioned, they are not functioning from their diplomatic premises.
From the airport.
They are at the airport under the control of the Americans.
Could we not have done the same?
Well, maybe we could have.
We are, after all, strategic partners of the Americans.
Yes, we could have, but I think, I would not want to second guess the government on this score.
The situation today is we've withdrawn, we don't have an ambassador, we don't have diplomats, effectively we don't have a functioning embassy. What next for India? Now what do we do?
I don't think that it is necessary for you to rush and do something. This whole business of we must do something, we must do something. At times it is best to just sit back and see how the situation is evolving and then take the right kind of decisions. Be engaged with all the major actors who are also involved, and see, try to understand how the situation in the country is actually evolving.
So there's no need to rush to a decision.
No.
Leave aside to recognize.
I don't think we are anywhere near that point.
So we're simply,
not even the sponsors of the Taliban have not yet.
So we're waiting, watching, and seeing how things develop.
Yes, I think that's the right course of action to take.
You made a very interesting point. You said stay in touch with as many people as you can. The principal player at the moment is the Taliban, but we have no contact with them. Last time around, when they were in power in the 90s, we coordinated our Taliban policy with Iran and Russia. This time round, Iran and Russia have established their own direct contacts with Taliban. India is perhaps the only major country in the region that doesn't have a line of contact with the Taliban. So are we, in that sense, out of the countries of the region, the most disadvantaged?
We are in a different place, and therefore I don't think our posture should necessarily be compared to the posture that, say, China has adopted or even Russia has adopted. Having said that, I think we have good relations with Iran, we have good relations with Russia. We should even perhaps keep in touch with China, because they have similar concerns with respect to, whether or not this means a resurgence of, radicalism in the region, and try our best to see how we can stay ahead of the curve as far as this very rapidly changing situation is concerned. But I do not think that we should assume that we are isolated. It's not that they are on the other side of the fence and we are on this side of the fence.
If not isolated, has our Taliban policy become an element of difference between us and these other countries?
There is no doubt that this is a setback for India. There is no other way of describing what has happened. So I accept that this is a setback. But I do not go as far as to think that therefore we are isolated somehow or the other. This Taliban dominated government has now received approval from all the major partners. The fact that they have kept engaged with the Taliban has not led to an immediate recognition of the Taliban, even though they have taken...
Perhaps because there is no government to recognize it yet. And that may be a reason.
That's why I'm saying that the fact that still 6 days we don't have a government, which is a bit of a setback for them in terms of the international legitimacy that they are looking for. And by the way, I am not even suggesting that you should not engage with the Taliban.
But how? Who do we engage with?
We have engaged with them in Doha. From what reports that one gets, there is still an establishment in Doha.
Wasn't that what Karzai was suggesting? Don't leave, stay on, we'll protect you, and that would have given us a chance to engage.
I do not think that we could have taken at face value that kind of assurance. Our first, priority is the safety and security of our citizens, including our diplomatic personnel.
It seems to be the other way around. The first priority is safety and security of diplomats. The citizens have been left without anyone.
If we had abandoned, our citizens and not made any effort to evacuate them, perhaps what you are saying might be correct. But that is not correct.
But there's no effort made after Sunday.
The fact is that we have working together with the Americans who are in charge of the technical area. In fact, one of the evacuation flights did take off from that technical area under US control. As long as that area is still under US control, I'm sure given the relationship that we have with the United States of America, it should be possible for us to evacuate those who wish to be
evacuated. Except that if you look at the situation as it's evolved from Tuesday when the last lot of Indians left, and those were diplomats and the ambassador, no Indian has left since then. Well, the French have allegedly taken 21 to Paris, but those were 21 who worked for the French embassy. The Americans are taking people out. Biden says 15,000 have gone out. The Brits say 7,000 have gone out. Not an Indian has gone out since Tuesday. No Indian plane has gone in to bring them out.
I have not heard of, there are Indians being sort of, marooned in Kabul and asking for evacuation and not being able to get it. So let us see whether or not...
There was a story on NDTV 3 days ago of Indians with their eyes covered up demanding and praying that they be taken out. It never got followed further, so I don't know what happened. But there was that one report.
I don't, as I said, I do not have any indication that there are large numbers of Indian citizens who are in fact wanting to be evacuated and have no means to do that.
The Sikhs in the Gurdwara in Karte Parwan are very keen to get out. They've been busy texting people in India, and there are 300-400 of them in the Gurdwara.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that if there is a situation which demands that the Indian government should work together with other partners to take them out, certainly we should do that. I'm not suggesting that we should wash our hands off our...
But the decision to evacuate diplomats and ambassadors,
I do not disagree with that.
Let's come to Pakistan, because it seems no matter how you look at it, the country that has gained the most is Pakistan. Not only are the Taliban their allies, and the word ally is euphemistic, but even leaders of the Northern Alliance, who are our allies, are today in Islamabad asking Pakistan to intercede on their behalf. And I'm talking about Ahmad Shah Massoud's brothers, and I'm talking about the Hazara leaders, Khalili and Muhakkik. So clearly, not only has Pakistan got its ally in control in Kabul, But people who are our allies are now interceding with Pakistan. Pakistan's the winner, no matter how you look at it.
Yes, I don't contest that conclusion. That whichever way you look at it, at least for the time being, at this point of time, certainly the biggest winner from this is Pakistan. No doubt about that. But whether or not this triumphalism is something that can be sustained over a period of time, that remains to be seen.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we can't really comment on that because we don't know. But let me put this to you. At the moment, Pakistan is the big winner. And India, which had very close, fraternal, intimate relations with Kabul over the last 20 years, is in a sense the biggest loser. We've lost those. How worried are you from India's point of view?
I'm worried, but also I believe that, we should not, in a sense, devalue what we had achieved over the last more than 20 years. For one thing, the kind of goodwill that we were able to have amongst the population in Afghanistan through the kind of assistance and support that we delivered, that I believe is an important asset. Now, at a time when the ordinary people of Afghanistan are facing this kind of difficulty, forget about their leaders whom you just mentioned, but can we keep faith with them? In the sense that if there are large number of Afghans who are in India, there are students, there are other Afghan refugees here, there may be more.
But you're suggesting that we should open our doors to Afghans who want to come. Not just those who worked with our embassy, but many others who want to come.
Yes, because if it is, I do not think that there could be a huge exodus into India because there are, physical barriers that stand in the way. But certainly those who are already here, or their family members who may wish to join them and are able to do so, I think we should adopt a more benign, supportive kind of position.
This goes contrary to the Citizenship Amendment Act.
Well, I have my own views about the Citizenship Amendment Act, but in this particular case, I would say that we should not think that, this investment that we have made for 20 years, it has gone up in smoke. It has not gone up in smoke if you don't let it go up in smoke.
And one way of ensuring it doesn't is open your doors to the family members of Afghans who are already here.
And look after those who are stranded here, in a sense.
So be kinder to students, renew their visas, help them carry on studying.
Right, and convey a sense of reassurance to them.
But the most important thing you're saying is that if the family members of Afghans already in India want to come, open your doors to them.
I think
don't be rigid about visas or permissions and that sort of thing.
I think that would be a very, very, very good gesture on our part. And in the longer term, retaining that kind of goodwill among the ordinary people of Afghanistan, surely that is of some value.
Do you think this government will actually listen to that advice?
I would certainly hope so. Because in terms of, what you are saying is a big setback for India. And as I considered, it is a setback for India. But I think we should look at a somewhat longer term perspective.
And this is one way.
And in that sense, this could be an asset.
And if we don't open our doors to the sort of people you're talking about, then in fact we are ensuring the setback will continue for a lot longer.
Yes, and the goodwill that you have, there would be certainly a dent in that, isn't it? I mean, if you adopt a less welcoming attitude.
Well, I certainly hope the government is listening to you, although many hearing the audience might have their doubts. I'm coming right to the end of this interview, but briefly I want to touch on America. To begin with, how much of damage has been done to America's image and standing by the last 2 weeks in Afghanistan?
Well, there are two things. One is that what Biden has done in terms of policy is not a departure from what we have seen with two other presidents. I mean, this retrenchment in a sense of America's, engagement with the rest of the world, this retrenchment began with Obama himself. You remember leading from behind, a strange kind of a remark for a superpower to make. And that has continued. It continued under Trump, and I think it is continuing under Biden. So in that perspective, it should not come as a surprise that a
But the
decision was taken.
humiliation of those pictures.
Yes, but the manner in which this has been carried out is certainly something which is humiliating to the United States of America. Because even the ability to actually take out their citizens and others from Afghanistan is dependent upon
The Taliban.
Yes. So, to find yourself in that position says something about what the
Biden
influence
says
of the
they could never have left Afghanistan without the chaos, and therefore, in that interview
is
to
not what
ABC,
he-
he suggested
that is
the
not
chaos
what-
was inevitable.
That is not what he said just a couple of weeks before. In fact, when people suggested that it could be something like the withdrawal from Vietnam, and with helicopters taking off from the rooftops, he said nothing like that could ever happen.
This time
And
it
that
was
is
even worse.
precisely-
We had people clinging to plane wheels
Yes.
and then falling off and
That's
dying.
right. I mean, to live down those kind of images, I think will take a very long time, no doubt about
So
it.
great damage has been done to the image
Yes,
and standing
and
of
the
America.
credibility of the United
Credibility
States.
as an ally.
That's right. But I would also say that there are certain questions in my mind. For example, when this peace deal was concluded and the Biden administration decided that it wanted to go ahead with
You're
that.
talking about the February 2020 peace deal.
Yes, but that was under Trump. I'm saying that it was endorsed by the Biden administration. If you see some of the statements made by, for example, Blinken, he said that the United States of America has every intention of retaining its diplomatic presence in Afghanistan, continuing with its support to many of the economic and social programs in Afghanistan. What has happened to convince the Americans that despite the fact that they have a certain understanding with the Taliban, and the Taliban, let us be fair to them, they have not attacked the American or international forces. So, if that was the expectation, why did you suddenly decide to actually pack up your embassy and leave?
Particularly when Blinken had himself said, we will be continuing.
That's right. So, what is it, what happened since then that convinced the United States of America that no, we have to actually make a clean.
And they can't say that we were under threat from the Taliban because no American soldier, no American facility, no American diplomat has been attacked.
Right. So, even now, if you look at the process of evacuation which is taking place, there is no attack from the Taliban on the American or international forces.
So, what you're saying is America's decision almost precipitately to evacuate its embassy, fly out its diplomats is inexplicable.
Is in one sense inexplicable. Now, I mean, this is speculative, so I cannot back this up by solid evidence, but it appears to me that the United States of America, seeing what is happening within Afghanistan, seeing that the aspect of this no longer or never again becoming a base for terrorism, has perhaps second thoughts about that. Now, in that sense, removing your embassy, removing all your citizens from Afghanistan, make sure that in any future conflict, you will not have hostages there. No American will be held hostage in a sense. So, if you are moving from counter-insurgency to counter-terrorism, this is helpful in that sense.
In other words, you can safely bomb Kabul from afar
Yes.
without fear.
Yes.
You're killing your own citizens.
That's right.
So they're not there.
Putting them in danger, because there could be retaliation against them.
And this
So
this
if you
would be
are-
why there's been this change between Blinken saying we
it
carry on
appears to me,
and
I mean,
getting out.
I'm speculating. As I said, I do not have evidence to back this up, but it appears to me that when they say that we are moving to a stage where we have over the horizon capabilities that can be used for counter-terrorism, this perhaps aligns with that kind of strategy.
Can
Possible.
I ask a different sort of speculative question? If you look at the way the American withdrawal happened, certain things stand out. 6 weeks ago, they abandoned Bagram in the dead of the night, leaving themselves with just 650 soldiers. Then suddenly they announced all their contractors, 16,000, would be leaving again overnight, thus ensuring that the Afghan army couldn't literally service its equipment. At that point, American intelligence forewarned the government that Kabul could fall in 90 days. And now the British papers are saying that in fact Blinken was told on the 1st of August, Kabul will collapse a lot faster, and that may be one explanation for the hurry with which they got their people out. But do you get the impression from this strange timeline that America wasn't that unhappy with the idea of Taliban taking over?
Well, let me say that they were quite prepared for a Taliban takeover.
Even sanguine about it.
Well, I mean, that's that's difficult to say whether they were sanguine about it, but I think at some point they in fact abandoned the Afghans, and it is odd that they should do so, because don't forget, there is in fact a strategic partnership agreement between the United States and Afghanistan, which is still valid.
And they ditched their strategic partner.
2024. And under that, there is a bilateral security arrangement, which also has been concluded. And by the way, this forever war ended in 2014. Because as a result of this particular agreement, the United States of America said it will no longer be involved in any combat role. And the same thing went for the international security.
Quite right. The forever war ended 7 years ago.
2014.
And in fact, if you look at the agreement that Khalilzad secured for the Americans with the Taliban, it was entirely in the Taliban's favor. The Taliban were committed to starting peace talks. They never did. Pressure was brought on Ghani to release 5,000 prisoners.
I will go
and
further.
And the Taliban carried on fighting.
I will go further, because you remember that Blinken had sent a letter to Ghani, basically saying, you are on your own, don't expect us to bail you out. In that particular letter, there was a kind of a draft peace agreement, which would be concluded between the Afghan government and the Taliban, which was also suggested. And some of the provisions of that draft are very instructive. One was that, there could be a transitional government, but which would involve the removal of Ghani himself. Secondly, also saying that there should be a high council which should be established to ensure that as far as jurisprudence is concerned, it is aligned together with Islamic doctrine. Rather strange.
And a complete shift from the position of the Ghani government.
And third, saying, abandoning a very major principle which used to be there, saying that as far as the parliament is concerned and as far as the provincial councils are concerned, in both there could be an induction of Taliban cadres without going through elections.
This is the point I'm making. If you look at the entire chronology as it plays out from February 2020 right through to the manner in which the withdrawal happened, don't you get the feeling that America was quite prepared for Taliban to take? In fact, they were facilitating it. They were facilitating it.
Quite prepared to abandon an ally.
But they were actually facilitating it as well, because the peace terms you're talking about are facilitation.
If not as an independent decision, it was certainly the collateral consequence of what they were doing. So I think there is no doubt that at a certain point of time, in this particular administration, a decision was taken that we have no responsibility as far as this.
So we end with two question marks about American policy. The first is the one you initially raised. Why did they abandon their embassy, pull out their diplomats, when in fact the Taliban had given them a guarantee of protection and security and had lived up to it?
Yes.
No American soldier, no American diplomat has been attacked since February 2020. So why abandon?
Sure.
Particularly when Blinken has gone on record to say we'll stay on.
That's right.
And the second big question mark is when you look at the chronology from February 2020 right through to the peculiar but hasty withdrawal, you get the feeling that America was quite prepared for the Taliban to take over. My words were they were even facilitating it. If you look at the peace terms that Blinken was suggesting to Ghani, peace terms that remove Ghani and facilitate Taliban.
It is difficult to avoid the impression that they were quite prepared to lean very heavily on an ally. Because don't forget, Afghanistan was a non-NATO ally of the United States. So you cannot claim that this was just another country. No, this was a non-NATO ally.
And they were leaning on Ghani to ensure that the Taliban have a say and a greater say than he would in a transitional government. He in fact was out of it.
Right. And by the way, the takeover of large swathes of the Afghan territory Again, I would point out that the Congressional Research Service in March had in fact said that it is quite likely that various communities within Afghanistan, knowing that the Ghani government no longer enjoys the support of the United States, that they will start making their own independent arrangements so as to protect their interests.
Arrangements with the Taliban, presumably.
Right. So that is exactly what happened. So you cannot even say that this was not anticipated.
Which is why I say, were they sanguine about it? Were they facilitating it? Those words may not be the most apt, but they certainly suggest that America has questions to answer.
Yes, I think that is correct. I mean, because these are things that are at when you look at them, they appear not to have any rational explanation.
So we end this interview with the following thought: the biggest gainer out of the countries surrounding Afghanistan is Pakistan.
Yes.
In a sense, the country with the biggest problem, the biggest loser, because our assets are there, is India. And the country that retreats is the superpower with its tail between its legs, humiliated by the actual manner in which that withdrawal was seen all over the world, but also leaving question marks in the air about the whole process.
Yeah, but I would only caution you that the United States has been written off a number of times.
Oh, I'm not writing off America. I'm simply saying they are embarrassed today.
It will take them a lot of effort to try and re-establish their credibility.
They're very good
both amongst friends as well as
they're very good at digging themselves out of holes, but at the moment they're definitely deep inside those holes.
No doubt about that.
Shyam Saran, thank you very much for an illuminating interview.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you.